Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello and welcome back to the show. Academic education undeniably offers the foundation to knowledge and skills essential for the working world. But far too often, fresh-faced graduates are met with challenges of transferring their academic qualifications to real-world skills that allow them to stay relevant, in demand, and ahead of the curve. So in this episode, we are looking at the value and importance of building career skills through professional education and applied learning. And guiding us through this is educational psychologist Loretta Simons. She currently sits on the faculty of Widener University as an internship coordinator in the psychology department. So we're incredibly fortunate to have her here with us today. Welcome to the show, Laurie.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for spending your time with us. I really appreciate it. But before we get started, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and what sparked your interest in educational psychology?
Well, I have a doctorate in educational psychology, and I think my interest in being an educational psychologist, really grew from two things. One was developing and falling in love with tests and measurements, a boring undergraduate class that looks at measurements and whether they're predictive or not. And the second piece of that was being fortunate enough to have a co-op and then field work where I worked in the field with children, adolescents, and adults, and working with them on educational skills, soft skills, hard skills, and everything above, and just looking at two separate systems when they really should be integrated. And that's what
Yeah.
educational psychology does.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was in Polytechnic, which is pre-university. It was a very, very trying time in terms of like academia, and I learned so much in classes and everything like that. But in the last 6 months of the entire journey where we did internship placement, I don't believe I learned anything more than in that internship. I feel like that was probably the most valuable time of my life, of my academic life. But I'm really curious to know, when it comes to your students, what are the most common struggles that they come to you with in terms of building career skills?
I giggle because it's so transformational because students come in and maybe 50% of them have this linear pathway that I'm going to be a physician assistant or a physical therapist or a psychologist. And the reality is there's a depth and breadth to undergraduate learning, and it's really fostering more critical thinking skills than anything else. And basically, I developed a program, and in particular, a course called Careers in Psych. And it's basically, how do you make lemonade out of sour lemons? What do you do with them? Because life isn't linear and career paths aren't linear. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle for students, 50% of my students, is understanding that it's not a linear path at all. And that what you come in with at 17, 18, 19 years of age drastically changes by your junior year, your interests, your passions. I think
Yeah.
for the other 50%, it's not knowing, not knowing what's out there at all. And so again, that course tends to expose them to the depth and breadth and give them nuggets, I call them, bits and pieces.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting to know. And I'm really excited to flesh this out further and go further into detail. But before we do that, I'd love to get to know you better. So, this is Have You Met Laurie? And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
Why are all the black children sitting together in the cafeteria by Daniel Tano?
Yeah. And what do you like about the book?
Um, it's a different perspective on race development, racial identity development, and it also presents a broader picture of looking at how students can develop and how
Yeah.
race is critical to that development.
That sounds like a really good pick. Thank you for sharing that. And as for movies, have there been any that you've enjoyed recently?
The 6888, which talks about World War II, and in particular, Major Charity Adams. And I absolutely loved it. And again, it's one of the missing pieces that I didn't grow up with knowing
Mhm.
in the United States. So
Yeah.
having that recognition.
And any podcast that you're listening to at the moment?
Mostly meditation podcasts. I usually start my day with them.
That's so fair. And how have you how drastically have you felt or how much have you felt the change in your life since you started listening to the meditation podcasts?
Oh, I think it's grounding. I think it grounds me in the morning. Sometimes I squeeze them in between, but I feel like it's definitely a grounding moment. It's part of my basic ritual that I call it now, routine.
Yeah, that's a great habit to have. I hope to one day actually practice meditation as well. I've been reading about it and I've heard about it a lot. I've tried it, in my youth, didn't work out that time round, but I'll get there at some point. So what kind of podcast do you recommend for meditation?
Oh, I mean, it really depends. Like it's really what you connect with, whether it's more focused, whether it's more cleansing, whether it's focusing on your daily stress. I think I I usually have them, I usually do a what pick for me, or if I'm in a certain headspace, then I go after a certain one on purpose,
Yeah,
intentionally.
yeah, I hear you. Okay, that's some good advice to have right there. And as for role models, who do you look up to either in your professional life or your personal life?
Um, I, I think professionally, I've always had wonderful academic mentors, whether it was the chair of my department as an undergraduate or my field placement mentor or my supervisors I've had. They all were able to offer me opportunities to learn and grow. And I think, my mother and father were wonderful role models.
Yeah. Oh, that's really sweet. And apart from that, has there been a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this date?
Test and measurements as an undergraduate student. I was a senior. It was a free elective, and I fell in love with testing, how you create tests, how you test them for reliability and validity, predictive reasoning, you know, things of that nature. And I just fell in love with that course. And
Yeah. And
it's linked with assessment. And that's my thing. That's my sweet spot is assessing programs.
yeah. And what would you say are the biggest lessons that you've learned from that course?
To fail, to fail, to create a test that doesn't predict, to create a test that doesn't do anything, in assessment to come out with outcomes that teach you things. It might not be what you were hoping for, it might not be what you wanted to find in the data, but then you can go back and question why. And that's a lesson learned.
Yeah, and I that really resonates with me because I'm such a neurotic person that I've had to learn the hard way that like failure is just learning. Like I actually have to tell that to myself in order to prevent myself from panicking too much or from spiraling. But genuinely, it's not just a mechanism. Like failing does teach you lessons. It's just how you've got to perceive it that way, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. Now let's move on to the interview section. And for starters, how would you define affluence?
So, more from a sociological perspective. So, beyond just economic, right? Your education, your profession, gaining, more of privilege, whether it's, more privilege, upper privilege, whatever privileges, but coming from your place and having upward mobility, also then developing that culture and the relationships that come with that type of privilege. If you're
Yeah.
coming from here, how do you go to there? And social capital, social networking, part of that upward mobility.
And how would you describe the relationship between professional education and affluence?
I think professional education gives you opportunity that you otherwise wouldn't have, which then can give you mobility, privilege, and potentially affluence of some sort. But it's giving you some kind of privilege that you otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, and what would you say are the key differences between traditional academic learning and applied learning in professional settings?
Yeah, you know, you're going to get me on a soapbox because I feel like it should be blended. I think where I'm from and within the United States, we're moving in that direction. I look at traditional learning in that these are your courses, these are your arts and sciences that are critically important because they teach you to, think about things you didn't think. They teach you to critically think and quantitatively reason and communicate effectively, right? Um, and that's the traditional piece. Whereas when you look at the applied piece, that's the field, that's the professionalism, and it blends and it overlaps with professional education.
Yeah.
You need that foundation to thrive, or to, I should say, have an opportunity to engage in that field work, whether it's a practicum, an internship, you know, teacher, being a teacher assistant of some sort. But you need that to get there. But then when you're there, you can draw on that and hopefully other skills, more soft skills, to move forward.
Yeah. And what sort of struggles do you think people who haven't had the opportunity um to experience applied learning or professional education, what kind of struggles do you think they may go through in professional settings?
I think it's hard to figure out what your passion is and what your sense of purpose is and what you want to do. How do you want to make a difference? Do you want to make a difference? We hope, right? That's the point. How do you become a lifelong learner? Um, and I think that's a struggle. I think if you're trying to figure out your career, you're limited. How do you know?
Yeah. And with regards to skill acquisition, which you've outlined a few skills that would be acquired through applied learning already, but there is a debate that's pretty divisive about hard skills versus soft skills, which is better, which is more important. Some believe soft skills are more important. Some believe the opposite. Some believe both are equally important. So what are your views on this? Which should be prioritized? Is there a way to think of it like that?
I, it's hard because my program that I developed is predicated on soft skill, which a decade ago when it was developed, that would be considered a dirty word in higher education. Um, but I really believe that it's a blended model. And I believe you need a foundation of hard skills, but it's the soft skill, it's the motivation that's going to get you through to the next level, that's going to have you succeed in your position.
Yeah, 100%. And to add to that, a lot of employers are now kind of on the lookout for what people like to call personality hires, and that's not necessarily meaning these so-called personality hires don't have any hard skills, but more of just their soft skills are really outstanding. What are your thoughts on that for as far as soft skills go?
Well, I think, personal skills are key because that's how you connect and communicate with folks. So, regardless of your position, that's a foundation you need to be able to do that to introduce anybody to anything, whether it's, the hostess at the restaurant seating you at a table, the car salesman trying to connect you to what buy a car, or you would hope the doctor that's going to perform your surgery. You'd want
Yeah.
that connection. And that's all interpersonal based. It's a soft skill.
Yeah. And are there any students of yours who come to you struggling with their applied learning and to keep up in professional settings? Are there any of them that come to you with struggles of like keeping up with that? And what is your advice for that?
So the whole program, and in particular, not to keep going back, but Careers in Psychology introduces students to the depth and breadth of psychology. I bring in roughly 18 to 20 guest speakers a semester based on their interests. They also get an opportunity to network with each other first and those guest speakers. They do the soft skill stuff, resume, cover letter, thank you letter. We do a lot of practice interviewing. We do a lot of stuff of who are you? What do you think you're interested in? And it's more of a reflection based class, which is very different for any student. So to learn how to switch that lens of learning, you're not asking me to write a, term paper or something, in code theory or scholarship is daunting for anyone, whether they're 18 or 20. So I think that's a struggle. I think anxiety is our friend, not to use that as a dirty word or a clinical diagnosis, but I think folks get nervous because these are things they haven't had to do. So how do you get more confident? You practice. I mean, that goes back to Bandura's self-efficacy. The way one gets more confident in what they're capable of doing, can see themselves doing, is actually practicing. And many students in that class also have opportunities before they actually do their field work to start doing stuff on a volunteer basis. That builds their confidence. We also have a robust, what we call academic service learning program, which I'm also co-director with Dr. Marina Burnett at Widener. And this is where the course is connected to something in the community, whether it's our local community or our broader community. And so if students have had also those experiences, they've developed more soft skills and they're more confident by the time they get to my class. And so I think giving them opportunities to, I don't want to say practice, but try things out, learn, fail, succeed, all that good stuff is really, really key.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. But for those who are already in the workforce and have not yet had the chance to explore professional education or experiential learning, what would you recommend them doing?
Well, I mean, there's lots of things they can do. The first thing I would do is figuring out what are you interested in. So there's different, I hate to say tests, but tests, whether it's the self-directed search or the Hollywood scale or something, or even just going to, a counselor for some career counseling, where they're figuring out what their interests are, what their skill set is, what comes naturally, what their passion is, if they have that opportunity, can help them in any way. Even if they went for one session, and you might not give up your day job, but then you could start to create what I would call a plan of how you could figure out, I'd really rather be doing this, but I'm not in a position to just quit my day job and go back to school, or quit my day job and go get another job. How can you start to bridge those two or piece them together? Or is there a pathway in what they are doing that can get them to where they want to go?
Yeah. And what are, apart from career counseling, what are the various types of professional education programs available and how do they contribute to someone's career development?
And so I think it depends if they're at a university versus not. So if they're at a university, they're in the United States, we typically have career centers, which is very helpful. We have something called career design and development, and students often use that. We actually have a program that's been disseminated at other schools and in different universities. And so if they have those opportunities, I think if they connect with a faculty member, they can ask a lot of questions. Informational interviewing can be 5 questions, 5 dirty questions, I like to call them, right? Your top 5 that you want to know. And you can ask anyone. People want to talk about what they do, their passions, what they like, what they don't like, what they discovered. And so just even doing that. And I've recommended that to folks who maybe had a career and now they're thinking of what do I want to do next, right? Okay, well, let's start to think about it. You can Google people, you can network on LinkedIn, you can ask people to Zoom, have a phone call, have a coffee. And if none of that works, you can ask, can I email you the questions just to get some information? And I think that's something I discovered a long time ago. My first boss out of school used to call me a leech, that I would go to all the different professionals and ask them questions. I didn't do it intentionally. I did it unintentionally because I wanted to know, how did they get to where they were? What did they have to do? How happy were they? Would they do it all over again?
Yeah, for sure. People online are always willing to share a little bit more about what they do, especially if it's to help the community. But circling back to experiential learning like internships and apprenticeships, what do you think is the most important thing to do with regards to that, apart from just, apart from just sitting through it?
Um, so I'm a data person. I'm a mixed method. So I love qualitative and I love quantitative. So, and I blend the two. Um, Research scholarship has shown us that the best predictor of student outcome is like treatment outcomes. It's the match. It's the fit between the student interest and the environment. And granted, you can't always make that happen. As I say, I don't have a magic wand or crystal ball, but the best fit possible based on their skills, based on their interests, which I've already, for me, have gathered that information from the previous course. And then they are matched, and they are matched to that placement. And then they reflect on it, scholarly wise in their class that goes along with it, because we do have a seminar. And then we also evaluate our program using mixed methods, both quantitative and interviews. And if there's, I hate where I'm at, I can't take it, emergency, they come in and we step back and we retool and we look at where did we go right, where did we go wrong, and let's get you placed with somewhere else if time permits.
Yeah, and that's actually really similar to how people in the workforce kind of treat their working life. At some point, you take some time to reflect, you reevaluate if this is the direction you want to go in, and then you retool, you potentially go for a different job, for example. So, how would you describe the importance of reflection and um, especially for somebody who hasn't yet done it?
I think it's key. I think you sit back and you could talk. You could make. I'm old fashioned like paper. Um, so I'm going to talk about on one side of the paper, what is it I do? On the other paper, what do I like about it? What do I dislike about it? What's my interest? If my interest is in X and I'm not doing it, what's out there? And you Google and you do the research on what is out there that aligns with that. Does it exist? I also suggest, because I'm a fan of we don't waste money, is that what's that job market going to look like? You know, Many students graduating today, they're not going to be at a job for 50 years and retire. They're going to have a skill set, and they're going to take that skill sets to different industries, not just different orgs anymore. And so really looking at what's the skill set, what's the growth in that skill set, what's the need in that skill set. Because you don't also want to invest, no matter what age you are or where you are in your career pipeline, in a career that's going to be obsolete or replaced by AI or something. You don't want to get in debt for 200, 400,000 for a job, or maybe you do, and that's good for you. But you should know all those facts so you can make a decision.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but there tends to be some people do have the experience of trying loads of different career paths and like dipping their toes in it in every little job and not really finding 100% satisfaction with it, or jumping around a lot. So what is your advice for that? What are your thoughts on that and your advice for it? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? What would you suggest in those situations?
I think it's a common thing where folks get caught up in something and they're in a position where they just can't leave for whatever reason, right? And they're not thrilled. They might be unhappy, but they're not thrilled with their position. It's not whetting their passion. And so one of the things that I typically suggest to folks, if you can't up and leave, and you can, create your storyboard, so to speak, of how to get to where you want to go. But if you have this immediate niche, or itch that you want to try out, maybe you go volunteer. So maybe you really want to go back and you want to do something with children, but you're not in that position. Or it would be maybe a pay cut, right? Maybe you go volunteer because then you don't know. You're going to make connections. You can start to ask people, an unplanned informational interview. You could start to see what's out there. And then you might be able to bridge the gap of, oh, I can go back for this, or I can sustain myself this way. Or maybe I don't want to after I do this.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, what do you think people should consider when they are reflecting on their career and their work and trying to make the next step?
I think it's figuring out what's your passion. And I think they also evolve over time. And so when I started in higher ed over 2 decades ago, I had a pause, sorry. I don't think I would have been, I couldn't imagine sitting here saying, oh, I've developed this program and we evaluate it. We have a, 90% employment rate and we, help students transition, right? I don't think I would have said to you, oh, I totally love assessment and that is my happy place. Right. And everybody else is like, run for it. You're nuts. But I think it evolves over time. And I think if you are open and you reflect, your sense of purpose also finds you if you keep those doors open. You figure it
Yeah.
out. Mhm.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. I mean, just, consider all opportunities. Don't ever like just shut something down unless you really genuinely have a strong despise for it or something.
Right. A
Um,
visceral effect.
yeah. But yeah, that sounds like some sound advice right there. I feel like I've learned a lot from you. So thank you very much for your time. Now let's move on to the practices and habits section, which should be really interesting. What habit would you recommend practicing to reevaluate and maintain career skills regularly?
Well, I would say, and it depends. A lot of times it's continuing ed, you being a lifelong learner, right? And so if you're in a profession, you're required to do continuing ed every, usually 2 years. And I think that's an opportunity. It's also a network opportunity. I think going, I'm so old fashioned, sorry, going to the library and reading. I think reading is so important. I mean, if you're not old and you want to do it on your phone or whatever folks do, they download. I think that's really important, seeing what's out there. And I think fact checking, because most folks, and I know I'm old, we don't read, we like bullets. And is it genuine? Is it valid information? What's the source of it? What's the source of the scholarship? Because anybody can put up a statistic. Anybody could put up anything. Anybody can publish anything today. It doesn't mean it's reliable or valid or factual information.
Yeah, for sure. Check your sources always. I'm one of those people who actually I don't know if you would hate me for saying this, but I have the library app on my phone and I just visit the library from my phone or my tablet or iPad, which I know is not exactly traditional, but it is far more convenient and accessible because a lot of people these days, I mean, I say a lot of people, but I actually don't know if that's, I don't have a statistic on it, so I don't know for a fact if a lot of people. But I just imagine that, you know, with commitments and such, going to the library is hard. It's okay. Like, find a way. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you can find a way to do it, and you know, I don't know which libraries are available everywhere, but if you go to a public library and you have a card, there's like a software you can use where you just scan the barcode or log in, and you'll have access to the library's like selection of online books, which is a game changer for me when it comes to research. Like, truly recommend that. But circling back to your answer, what do you think are the most common challenges that arise when people attempt to do this?
Um, I think it's a variety of things. And it depends where you're coming from. So, you know, it's developmental. So it could be motivation, it could be insecurity, it could be the demands of too many things, right? And I think it's if folks create it not as a goal of I need to do this, but I want to do this, and when I could do it, I do it, then it takes the pressure off. And just, you know, being flexible and fluid with when they can fit things in. That's, you know, there are folks who are going to say, here's my goals, boom, boom, boom. And then there are folks who do not respond well to that. And if I don't read the book or I don't download the book and read it, you know, it's beating myself up. And I think it's doing what comes naturally without the pressure.
Yeah, and that's pretty similar to, well, I've spoken to a few psychologists, and it always seems to be a common theme that, you know, psychological flexibility really helps in any area of your life to be flexible and fluid and just kind of, you know, take the events as they come and learn to work around it or work with it. And that sounds like it's really important to learn lessons as well. But how, yeah, what are your thoughts on that, on needing that psychological flexibility to self-reflect and be okay with whatever comes in your life?
I think that's key. I think that's critical. And I think many times, you know, we're this, we societies, we are this overpaced world, right? We have to do everything excellent. We have to be the best for everything. And it doesn't really work. Find one thing you're really good at, one thing you really like, one book you love to read. Maybe reread it a few times because rereading it can give you something different, a different view. And so I think also being flexible to all the opportunities and everything that you want to do has to be there. You have to be willing to change and grow and reflect. And that's how you create a different pathway. Career pathways are evolutionary and they're always evolving. They're not stagnant for most folks. Okay. And so it's being open to all that lifelong learning. And that doesn't mean formal education. It may not even be professional education. It could just be a skill. It could be a role.
Yeah. And for those who aren't necessarily psychologically flexible and struggle with that, what advice do you have for them? What are some things that they can practice to kind of train that?
Um, well, meditation. No, I mean, staying present, trusting your gut, um, and really taking a chance, even if they have fears.
That sounds awfully courageous. Do you have any examples on what this looks like?
Yeah, I think if your body tells you everything. So if it feels right or if it doesn't feel right, it also tells you when your boss taps you on the shoulder and says, I'd like you to do this, and your stomach starts to squirm because maybe you're not sure that you can actually do the job that you were asked to do or take on this leadership role in some capacity. Um, and then I think you take a leap of faith. You just go do it. And then it doesn't look as scary once you've done it. whether you've done a great job or you failed, because you'll figure it out. Even if you failed, it's learning. And so I think having those opportunities, and if somebody taps you on that shoulder to lead, to mentor someone, um, even if you're squirmy about it or unsure about it, go with it.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. That kind of reminds me of an experience that I had ages ago when I was still like fresh out of polytechnic and waiting to go to university and I was unemployed. I had a gap year that I wanted to fill with experiential learning and get a job in the industry somewhere. And I got this job, but it wasn't making me feel good. I was really excited to do it because it sounded like a wonderful opportunity, and the salary I was promised was very desirable for at that time. But I went to the office, and it turns out that the boss expected kind of everyone to work overtime to ridiculous hours. Like my first day in the office, I stayed until 10 p.m., which I guess, in some fields that is expected, but certainly not my field, which at that time was marketing. For the first day was just a bit like much. And then I soon, like after a couple of days, I learned from other employees that they hadn't been paid and they'd be working overtime for months, close to a year. And that's where I started going like, oh no, this doesn't feel good. And it feels like I'm not actually going to get paid. And this person's just making use of me. And I was kind of, in my brain was thinking like, okay, it's still a wonderful opportunity though, if I make something good out of it, even if I don't get paid until like next year. I'm living in my parents' house. I can do it right now, but then it's not making me feel good, So I ended up leaving the company like three on my third day, and I've always viewed it as like not really a failure, but just kind of a little mistake that I made for a few days that drained my energy so much. But now looking back, I think I like, after hearing what you've had to say, it sounds like, I made the right move and I was just listening to my guts. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say tell me more about why you thought it was you made a mistake, because you did make a you trusted your gut, and that's important. And if it didn't feel right, the culture didn't feel like the right fit, and there was, some dishonesty, it sounds like, going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what a lot of people have to hear a bit more often because I think we are so used to thinking of it as like our failures first and kind of inflate that. I've always viewed it as like the mistake was joining it in the first place and trusting this person in the first place. But I suppose it's more of just, I've learned now to not be so trusting and to like research the employer a bit more first before jumping right into an opportunity that sounds too good to be true. So it's a lot about reframing the mindset almost, right?
Well,
And
right. Well, it's also developmental. You were an emerging professional. You probably, respect your elders. They're honest, they're truthful, even if you did all the research. But that doesn't really mean they are until you're in with them, right? And
yeah,
if you're an emerging professional, you may not know what that looks like until you know what that looks like. And it's
yeah,
navigating it. And it is the reframe, because it wasn't you, it was them.
yeah, 100%. And with that in mind, how important do you think that reframing of mindset, instead of focusing solely on the so-called mistakes you may have made, and more thinking about the learning opportunities that arose from those challenges or mistakes that you made? How important do you think that is?
I think that's critically important. So, the way you cognitively think about things is your perspective, and then it influences how you view yourself and the broader world. And I think if something were to happen and you feel responsible for it, even though you're not, a reframe is completely necessary because you're being accountable for stuff that you're not really responsible for.
Yeah. My next question, I'm not sure. Potentially, you may be offering the same answer, which is meditation. But what are your suggestions or recommendations for learning how to hone that reframing of mindsets?
So there is meditation and there's meditations that focus on that, but there's also the power of positive thinking. There's optimism, there's positive psychology, there's a lot of positive affirmations. There's even, and I'm not really technical, but there's a whole lot of things on the phone, apps of positive affirmations. And if you give yourself just, a few minutes each day to read through them, that helps with the reframe. If you don't have time for meditation, although there's 5-minute meditations you can do. But if you don't have time for broader stuff, I mean, just even in a nanosecond, reading a positive affirmation can change your mindset. I believe in post-it notes all over someone's computer to stay positive, to stay calm, to stay in a good headspace when they are working, at a job that's difficult or having meetings with the boss where they're not feeling validated. Because folks want to be heard, they want to be validated, and they want to grow. And if they're not getting that from, a work environment, then that tends to sour. That tends to, contribute to lack of motivation. And so sometimes it's having that reframe to making sure that it's not them, it's your boss, but this is how you stay positive and stay present and grounded can really help.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I had such a good time talking to you about this, and I've learned a lot as I've displayed in the practice and habits section, sharing the sudden, what do you call that? Epiphany after talking to you. So that's really appreciated. Now let's move on to the open mic section. And this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away, Laurie.
I think my passions have changed. The biggest piece that I'm really passionate about is assessment, like I said. And part of it is not just assessing a program of what's working, what's not, how do we improve? Because I believe it's always about continuous improvement and closing that loop. But it's also about watching students develop and how do they develop their professional identity? How do they develop their career interests? How does that change over time? And how do we make and create opportunities for them to discover their passions, to discover their sense of purpose? And given my background with service learning, which is part of experiential learning, it's how do you become a productive citizen? How do you contribute to the greater good? I'm a humanist, sorry. In society, how do you do that too? Because that's really your legacy. That's what you leave behind. And that's what you hope someone can have.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And what you do sounds really fascinating as well. I think it's great that you are combining qualitative and quantitative methods together. I think that's just best of both worlds. So yeah, and thank you for spending your time with us today. I very much appreciated it. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Well, the Widener University website has some information. I'm also on LinkedIn.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes or the YouTube description, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Wealth Pathways, the Affluence Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at affluence.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.